Hey, this is Vision, and you're watching Skateboarding California.
And I'm Julie Westfall with Philly Girl Skateboards and Pink Widow Distribution.
And this episode is all about these. It's about this and it's about this. These are custom skateboards that I designed and had made. And this whole episode is going to show you the whole step-by-step process of how I did that, how I designed them, what I did, where I sent them, and that way you, if you are interested in doing that sort of thing, can do that as well. So, Julie, what is your reaction and what do you think of the custom board?
Okay, well the one I have in my hand is called the Makaha. I'm not sure what year that came out, the original one.
Yeah, I don't know. This one is actually, these are both designed after two of my first skateboards. This was the first board that I ever had, was a plastic blue Makaha. And so that's why this one looks the way that it does.
Yes, and this one's very interesting. I thought I was going to have a harder time on this one, but I actually enjoyed myself a little bit more. Yeah, both boards are really awesome. The tail is really skinny, so if you're not used to big pool boards in general, it's a little tricky because you've got this really interestingly narrow tail with the giant fat board.
Yep.
But it's got, you know what I loved about it is it cruises, and you can even pull it into a bowl if you want, like we did.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of speed. It's like a carver. It's amazing. I really do like this board. And personally, I was like, fell in love with the blue. I don't know.
That's pretty much the same color as my original.
Yeah. Well, I think that's cool that you modified it a little bit to your own way, but you still kind of kept it true to the Makaha form. So, good job.
Thank you. And this one is modeled after the Powell Peralta Per Welinder board. It is Per Welinder, by the way. He is Swedish. It's Per Welinder. Everybody calls him Per Welinder. That's wrong. His name is Per Welinder. Wrong. See, I'm still wrong. I'm trying to be all cocky and act like I'm all smart and I know what I'm talking about, and I still screwed it up. Okay, it is not Per Welinder. It is not Per Welinder. It is actually pronounced Per Welinder. Okay? See, I even got the accent in there. That's the actual Swedish way of pronouncing it, okay? It is Per Welinder. Little roll on the R's. That's the way the Swedes talk, so yes. Not Per Welinder, but Per Welinder. Little roll. Got it? Okay, there you go. Right pronunciation. So what did you think of the Per Welinder deck?
Okay, originally when I first saw it, I was like, holy cow, it is amazing. I mean, the etch work, the way it's shaped, everything about it is says style to me. But I thought it was pretty damn gnarly.
Yeah.
Very interesting shape. Never ridden a shape like that before.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, wow, maybe Eric will put in a little bit of me getting afraid to drop in on it just because it was so heavy. And I never dropped in on a board so heavy before. I wasn't sure how hard to hit down. So I sketched back, came back up to it, went to the mini bowl, dropped in. Okay, I was like, okay, let's do it. I got this. But once I kind of got used to it, it was really fun. I kick turned on it, but it was kind of hard to kick turn. But it's all carved. I mean, in this snake run is where it shines. It's amazing carving, and I'd like to ride it on the streets or down some hills. It's actually a lot of fun. So.
Cool. Yeah. All right. My thanks to Julie for offering her opinions on the boards. And before I can tell you how I made the boards, I need to extend my thanks to these gentlemen right here. Larry Stevenson created Makaha Skateboards. George Powell started Powell Peralta, along with Stacy Peralta, of course. And then in the middle there we have Vernon Cortland Johnson, who is the artist who did the original artwork for the original Per Welinder street deck. And of course on the right we have Per Welinder himself. Now, I don't have my original skateboard, the Makaha that I had when I was a little kid, but I looked all over the internet and eventually I found somebody on eBay was selling one, and these are the photos that they had posted. And that is the exact board that I had when I was a little kid. I, again, don't remember the exact year, so I just put circa 1978, but that is what the original Makaha that I owned looked like. Per Welinder was known mostly as a freestyle skateboarder, and here are a few different models of his freestyle deck. They're all just different colors. Now, my board was the street and pool deck, which looked like this. It was black and it had red highlights on it. But the street board also came in a whole bunch of different colors, just like the freestyle decks you see on the left. And this right here was just the Powell Peralta logo that is actually on top of the street version of the board. Now that you've seen the original versions of these two boards, I'll explain how I created my tribute versions. First, I'll go over the shapes, and then I'll go over the graphics. So as you can see here, we have the Makaha Tribute and the Per Welinder Tribute. They're both the exact same length and width. They're both 34 by 10. The Makaha has a double drilled wheelbase, so it's got a 16.5 and a 17, so you can see there's double holes in the front. And then the Per Welinder is just 16.5. Both boards have a 7-inch tail and a 6.1-inch nose. Incidentally, some people sometimes ask whether or not the runes that are written around the perimeter of the deck actually say anything, and they do. The translation is this: search and strive, push beyond with strength, yours not theirs, that is the key. After explaining how I created the shapes, I'll explain how I did the graphics. The Makaha logo in the grip tape, and the etched Per Welinder on the bottom of the Per Welinder board. So, let's start with the shaping. Now, in order to make the shape for the Makaha deck, I just used a vector-based drawing program, namely freehand. The first thing that I did was import this photograph of the deck, and I realized that that photograph is not exactly right because we're not looking straight down on the board. It's at a little bit of an angle, but that's okay for my purposes. It still would suffice. So the first thing that I did was trace half of the deck, and then once I had that shape, I duplicated it, made a mirror image of it, and joined those two shapes together, which resulted in this deck right here. Now this deck was not the proper size. I wanted different proportions for the board, namely I wanted it to be 10 by 34. So I took that shape and blew it up into this, and as you can see over here, that is a 10-inch by 34-inch deck. Now the tail was still way too skinny, so I had to go in manually and widen the tail, which resulted in this. This is the final image of the board right here. So as you can see, it still represents the spirit and the sort of vibe of the original Makaha deck, but it's a much more skatable board. It's much more practical for modern day like pool skating and street skating. And then if you zoom in, you can also see the bolt pattern that I made. This represents a 16.5-inch wheelbase, and there are these little N's and O's, which represent new school and old school for the bolt pattern. So that is basically how I created the Makaha shape. Now that you've seen how I did the Makaha shape, the Per Welinder shape was exactly the same. All I did was import the image that I took of my reissued deck, trace it out, and then scale it up so that it was 10 inches by 34 inches. This right here represents the final 10 by 34 inch version of the shape. Creating the Makaha graphic was pretty simple because I realized that all I needed to do was find the proper font. It's basically nothing more than the Hatenschweiler font, which is stretched and distorted a little bit. So this right here is Makaha in the original Hatenschweiler, and all I did was take that, convert it into paths, stretch it out, and then as you can see it matches up perfectly with the original Makaha logo. Creating the graphic for the Per Welinder shape was much more complicated than Makaha. I started out with taking multiple photographs of the 2010 reissued version of the board, which you can see right here. And then I stitched those photographs back together in Photoshop, so I had this incredibly high-resolution version of the board. Here we have Per Welinder's name in runes, and then an iron cross, and then Powell Peralta reissue 2010, and then Per Welinder street style down at the bottom. And of course, it also provides an incredibly high-resolution version of the vampiric Nordic skull, which you can see right here. So once I had this in the computer, I needed to then isolate all of the black in the image so that I could pull out the runes and the skull. And that resulted in this image. Now, the thing that I didn't want to do in the final version was that I didn't want this sort of stone look. I didn't want all that little speckled black stuff, because I just felt that that would be kind of overwhelming if all of that was etched into the wood as well as the runes and the skull. So I had to go in and actually manually erase all of this extra little speckly stuff. So that is what I did right here. As you can see, I eventually isolated all of the runes apart from the speckles. And there we can see the skull kept in as well. And then down here at the bottom, I kept the original artist logo. There's the VCJ logo. And I also removed, right below the vampiric skull and right above the iron cross, I took out Per Welinder's name and I put in my own name, also in Nordic Germanic runes. So once I did that, and I had it all isolated, as you can see, there's a little difference between this center board and this one on the far right. The one on the far right is a little bit longer. Remember I said I wanted the proportions of this deck to be 10 by 34. And the original deck is not that size. I wanted to stretch it out a little bit so I could have a longer wheelbase. So I didn't want to distort the skull, because by stretching out the skull it became slightly disproportional and just looked weird. Now the runes I could do that with. So as you can see, the runes on this board are just a little bit longer than this. They're all stretched slightly. So what I did was isolate the helmet skull layer onto its own layer, and I did not distort that, and I only stretched out the text of the runes and then put the helmet back in place. And then finally, the laser requires a bitmap image in order to actually etch what you're trying to etch into the wood. It can't be grayscale, it can't be color. So this final version, as you can see, is very, very high resolution and is just solid black and white. There's no other coloring at all in the image, so that the laser can just etch out the black sections of the graphic. So there you go. That is how I created the Per Welinder version of the graphic to be used for the laser etching from the original photograph of the reissued board. Now you know how I created the graphics and how I created the shape, but the question remains, how do you actually get the boards made? Well, as you can see, I actually got 3 boards made. I got one made by a company called 5 Point Skates in Ohio. I got one done by a company called Deck Crafters, and I got one done by ABK Skate. And I also got 3 versions of the Per Welinder board. So now I'll go over how all those boards turned out and sort of the details of each one, so you can see what the results were from each custom manufacturer. So now here's the really neat stuff. Here is the laser etching. So this right here is the ABK board. This is the laser etching before it was stained, okay? And next, this right here, this is the 5 Point Skates deck with the laser etching before it was stained. Now, what happened was I actually forgot to shoot this footage, so you see these little bits of stain on the edges of the board. That's because I stained the tops of the decks, and I hadn't stained the bottoms, and then I realized, oh wait, I didn't get any footage of this yet. So this final one right here is obviously, this is Deck Crafters, and this is the Deck Crafters board before it was stained. So now these are the super tight close-ups, and right there is the logo for Soul Ride Longboards. Soul Ride is the company in San Diego who did all the laser etching. And as you can see, the laser etching is just incredibly detailed, and it turned out really, really cool. It was just better than I imagined that it would. So this just cuts to a bunch of different close-ups, like this right here is a close-up of the Iron Cross and the etching in that. You can see how that turned out. And then next we cut to my name. Remember that I mentioned removing Per Welinder's name, and I put in my own name. So there you go. So here we can see this extreme close-up of what my name looks like etched into the boards. And then after this footage of my name, we cut to more footage of the skull, because I just kind of wanted to show how incredibly thin and fine all these lines were, and just how amazing it turned out. I mean, every tiny little speckle and detail and little bit of shading all really came through and really looks excellent. This right here is the Deck Crafters board. I used Varathane Red Oak stain on this and some clear over the top. And then the next board, this one right here, this used American Walnut the American Walnut color of stain, and this is the 5-point Skates deck. And then finally, I used this Cabernet, this nice kind of red stain, on the ABK deck. And by the way, those little cans that I was showing down there in the corner, that's not exactly what they looked like. Those, I believe, were interior colors. I used exterior stains for all of these. But here, when I zoom back out, you can see all three of the decks all laid out nice and bright in the sun, so you can see exactly what the coloring and staining looked like for each. There you have all the bottoms, and now we have the top of each deck. This right here is the Deck Crafters board, and this again was stained with red oak stain, so has a little bit of a reddish kind of tint there to it. The next board right here, this is the ABK, and as you can see, the stain actually leaked through some of the bolt holes there. So putting this board together, probably put black grip tape over it because the stains there look kind of funky. And then finally, this right here is the 5-point Skates deck, which used an American Walnut stain. And I kind of like this color the best, so this was the one I actually put together as a final piece. Here are the 3 Makaha decks. We have, starting on the right-hand side right there, that's the ABK version of the deck. And again, clear grip tape didn't turn out so good. Has a lot of little air pockets and things in there. I tried my best to get them out, but alas, that's about the best I could do with the thing. And the center board right here, this one is the 5-point Skates version of the deck. And I actually got the grip tape, the clear there that actually says Makaha, I actually got that to look a little bit better by the time I put the final version of the board together. And then finally, this one right here is the Deck Crafters version. And as you can see, the holes on the grip tape line up probably just about the best on this version of the deck. Now here, I kind of have a weird sort of angle of the bottoms, and I really wanted to show you this so that you could see the difference in the concave. As you can see, the 5-point Skates and the Deck Crafters are almost equal in depth, and the ABK right here is much more shallow, and this is kind of a good angle to show you the difference in the concave between all 3 of those boards. And you also get to see a big difference in the shade of blue that was used. So here we have the final version of the Per Welinder deck, with the trucks and the wheels and the grip tape and everything applied. Now you'll notice this is something that I did not mention earlier. See there on the tail how the etching kind of fades away and it's not quite as deep as it is in the rest of the board? That's because the laser has a certain depth that it can cut to. And if stuff starts to get a little bit too deep and a little too far away, then it doesn't penetrate the wood quite as well. So that's why, for example, the ABK deck has the best looking etching, because that deck had the least amount of concave, and therefore the laser was able to penetrate the wood a lot better on that board than it was on the others. So, you know, it's not perfect, but it still looks fantastic, and it still all turned out. But that's the reason why the nose and the tail kind of start to fade a little bit there in the etching. This, of course, is just another shot of the bottom of the deck, and as you can see, I put on Enduro Series Autobahn wheels, 61mm 97A with good old tracker trucks. This right here is the original grip tape, which I was kind of unhappy with. The clear grip tape, again, had way too many bubbles and stuff in it, and it just kind of frosted up the wood too much. So I used this instead. This is Lucid Grip. As you can see, it comes in 2 canisters. One has the glue and one has the grip. So you spray on the glue, then you shake the grip on like a salt shaker. And here's a good close-up of it so you can see how the grain turned out. And of course, the thing I was the most concerned about was, am I going to be able to get this on evenly, right? I mean, if you're shaking it on literally like a salt shaker, I figured, oh man, it's going to be all splotchy. I'm going to have some parts where the grip is really thick and then some parts where it's really thin. But as you can see, it actually turned out pretty good, and the grip tape is pretty even all over. Now here is a shot of what it looks like in the shade, And you can see, again, the wood grain shows through beautifully. It's exactly what I wanted. And the grip tape is pretty much even across the whole thing. And here in the sunlight, direct sun, you can see there are parts that have a little bit more grip and a little bit less, but all in all, this stuff works pretty good. It's still not as grippy as normal grip tape, but it's definitely adequate and it worked great for this project. And finally, we have the fully assembled Makaha deck. As you can see, I went with the 17-inch wheelbase as opposed to the 16.5. And you can see right there, I got the Makaha lettering with the clear grip tape to look a little bit better. Doesn't have quite as many air bubbles and stuff in it. Looks pretty decent. And right here, we get a good side view, and you can see the wheels that I put on. These are rain skates. Hornets, 65mm and 98A. And finally we get another close-up here of the bottom of the deck. And of course, you can't really do a video on custom boards without having some footage of actually skating the things, right? And seeing, well, how do they skate? Are they fun? Did they turn out cool? Are they enjoyable to ride? So here's a little bit of footage of me on each of the decks. Here I am dropping in on the deep end of the Venice pool with the Makaha Tribute deck, and as you can see, I get some pretty decent speed on this board. I can get moving pretty fast. It's a little bit awkward with that skinny tail because your back foot kind of always sort of feels like it's going to slip off and that you don't really have a solid kind of footing, but you know, I don't know, it's somehow it works. I mean, as you can see, I can ride it pretty well. I almost ate it right there when I was doing that front side because I was going so darn slow. But I successfully launch out at the end right here, which on a lot of my decks I don't, and I hang up. So, you know, all in all, it's a pretty cool deck. I really enjoy riding the Makaha.
Now this is the Per Welinder Tribute.
Riding in the snake run at Venice. And as you can see, I'm kind of slow on this board. I don't know what is up with that. I think I'm a little bit faster on it now. But honestly, I think it's probably the grip tape. I think it's the fact that it has that lucid grip on it. It's, like I said, it's not as grippy as regular grip tape. And so I constantly just feel like my feet aren't really solid and really locked on. And it makes me a little nervous. And so I think that's why I'm going so slow. And right here, finally we end with a run in the pool.
Also on the Per Welinder deck.
So again, not quite as quick as I am on the Makaha because, like I said, I think my feet feel I'm a little less confident with it, but there you have it. There is how I made my two custom decks based upon the first two skateboards that I ever owned.
Makaha and Per Welinder.
Well, thanks for watching this episode of Skateboarding California. I hope that it's been educational and informative, and now you know how to make your own sort of custom skateboard and some of the places where you can get that sort of thing done.
Yes. And yes, as always, thank you for watching. Now I'm really interested in making a etching of either Silly Girl on it or something really rad.
Yeah, that's true. So you could do Silly Girl
cool
stuff.
I'm actually looking forward to it, and I think that this board is... both these boards are really awesome. Yeah. And, I mean, a little expensive, but definitely reasonable if you want a killer board. So
yeah,
and it's a good investment for sure.
Cool. All right. See you later.